Alright, so you're welcome to the Ultimate Beginner course in JavaScript, and in this video we are going to be seeing every basic thing you need to understand and learn about JavaScript to proceed with your coding career. Alright, so there are two things we are going to be utilizing throughout this video, and that is we'll be using VS Code, which will be to write our code, and we are also going to be using the Chrome browser to actually run and see what we are actually doing. And for you to download VS Code, you can simply go to code.visualstudio.com/downloads and you get it. You can click the link in the description of this video to actually get this particular software. It is free, and irrespective of your operating system, you can download either for Windows, Linux, or Mac. So download VS Code and let's proceed. All right, after downloading VS Code, you have VS Code open like this. All you need to do is to open VS Code, or you just go over to your normal screen, right click anywhere, and you create a new folder. So we'll create a new folder and we just call the new folder JS. So I'll right click and create a new folder, and I'll call this folder JS. So that is the name, JavaScript. Now, after this folder has been created, now this is the folder that we are actually going to use as our source folder. So as you can see here, I have so many coding projects running. This is actually a coding project I've been working on for the past few months, and I'm actually kind of getting to completion. So I have so many programs I've been working on, but let's dive deep into the program. So all you need to do is to be able to drag VS Code or to drag this particular folder and paste it on VS Code. All right, VS Code is on my other side of the monitor. I just want to bring it here where you guys can see. And then all I need to do is to come over here. I click on this JS that we created here, and I'll just drag JS and drop on VS Code. And we'll open the folder in VS Code so that we can start coding inside of VS Code. If you're a developer or someone who have been writing code, you must have been versed with how to use Visual Studio Code already. So we are not going to be diving deeper into you understanding how you should actually be using VS Code, but we'll just see how to set up our environment and proceed. All right, the first thing we want to do is that we are going to be creating two files, or even creating two files. We can do everything inside of one file. So the first one is, how do you actually integrate JavaScript to your HTML file? So the first thing we want to do is to create an index.html file, and this particular index.html file will be the file that will actually read what we are actually working on. So if we are creating a program that has to kind of run online or in a browser, we need an index.html file, which will actually be the file that will be routed first when we actually visit that particular page. So this is our index.html file. I want you to press enter. When you press Shift 1 enter, you actually have this dummy code here, which is simply like a basic HTML written code. Now let me expand my browser so that you guys can actually see what I'm working on vividly. The next thing we want to do is to be able to kind of visualize everything. All right, so we have our program actually running here. We don't know if this is working yet, but in here I can simply create a basic h1 tag here. So I say h1, and here I just call it hello world. So I can create an h1 tag, and I call this hello world, and I close the h1, and then I save. Then I'll right click on this and I'll go and I'll open with Lifesaver. If you don't have Lifesaver installed, all you need to do is to click on extensions and search for Lifesaver. So you come over here to extensions, click on extensions, and you search for Lifesaver, and you actually open, and you'll be able to run your program with Lifesaver. So as you can see here, we have our website running on this extension or on this local host, and it says hello world. So I will just minimize it and put it at the corner so that we can see. And then for our code editor, I'll also minimize it and put it on the side so we can have that view side by side. For this one here, we can kind of reduce it, and we have our browser here. So this is what we have. All right. Now, this is what we have. Now, for us to be able to utilize JavaScript in our program, we can link JavaScript before the body closes. And we link JavaScript using the script stack. And we have two types of JavaScript that can be used in your project. The first one we have is JavaScript that is inside of your HTML, which means you have JavaScript running inside of the HTML. Like, you just create a script tag like what we have over here. And once you create a script tag, you can just be typing your JavaScript inside here. Let's take, for instance, I want to create an alert, of which we are going to talk further or more on it in this program. We can simply say alert We can use an alert function, and in this alert function here, we simply say hello world, and it will actually alert hello world to the browser, which means it will refresh this particular web page. It is actually going to alert hello world. And this is actually a means you can use in some of your projects to actually alert something to a user if you want, after they take an action, or if you want to just display something on their first instance. Alright, so when we do this, all you need to do is to be able to pass in the name and the route or the directories where that particular JavaScript file is found. Let me just take for instance that in your project, what you usually have, or the structure will be that you have a folder called JS, and this particular folder called JS will have the file called index.js, which means we'll have, like, let's call it app.js. It will have app.js, and all JavaScript files end with the extension .js. So if we have this created like this, so if you want to be able to come over here to your HTML and actually get to that particular file, all you need to do is to specify the route. So you put / followed by the folder name JS / followed by the file name app.js. So we have this. So if you have this and you actually want to see if it's actually connected, we are going to come over to this file here, which is the app.js file, and we'll create that same alert, and we are going to alert again hello world. So we want to alert hello world too, and we see. So if we save this particular file here and we come back and refresh this, if it alerts hello world, it means that particular file and the HTML have successfully been connected. But if it does not, we are simply going to go back to debug and see where that error is actually coming from. So I don't know why it's taking time to load, but let's just hold on for a while. Alright, so it gave us the alert hello world, which simply means that our JavaScript is connected to it. So that is the first thing you have learned so far in this video. Simple, that for you to connect JavaScript, you can actually do it in two ways. You can connect JavaScript within the HTML file, or you can actually link an external JavaScript file to actually run all your JavaScript, of which the last option is actually the best to use. Alright, so let's be diving deeper. So far we have set up our environment and we are going to start coding. So the next step we have are the JavaScript basics. Alright, so in JavaScript is actually a language that has its own syntax, which means while coding in JavaScript, whether you use a semicolon or not, there is no problem. So JavaScript is not the type of programming language that you face problems with it because you actually fail to use a semicolon. Now, all programming languages work from the basics of one particular aspect, which are called variables. Now, a variable is simply a container space that you use to store a value. Your name is a variable that stores your name, which means if my name is code with crest and the word name is equals to code with crest, it simply means that my name is a container that stores value, and that value is code with crest. And there are three ways of which we can create variables in JavaScript, and I'll be diving deeper into these three ways of creating variables in JavaScript and explaining the differences between them. The first one we're going to see is the let keyword. So we have three keywords that we use in creating variables in JavaScript. We have the let keyword, we have the var, and we have the const. So these are three keywords that are mostly used. Now let's start with the first one. Let's say let name be equals to, let's say, code with crest. This is the name equals to code with crest. Now, whenever we use the let keyword, we are simply trying to assign or create variables that constantly change within the program scope, which means as the program is running, there might be a tendency that this particular name might change, or something happens or gets updated within the program. The next one we have is the var keyword, and we can simply say var, for instance, age of code with crest is equals to, let's say, 4. So, and then the next one now we want to say is the const. Let's say const is developer is equals to, let's say, true, and that is actually a variable. So these are three types of variables that stores three types of data types. We are going to be diving deep into data types after understanding what variable is. So basically, a variable has three constraints in JavaScript. The first constraint is the keyword to which you actually use to define it. In this instance, we have three keywords that we use in defining variables. We have the let, the var, and the const. The next one we have is the name of the variable. Now, when we declare a variable, we must give a name to that particular variable because we want to be able to identify that variable from its variable name. Let's take for instance, if my name is equals to code with Crest, if you want me, or if you want to get code with Crest, the identity you use for code with Crest is your name. So it is the name attribute. The next one now we have is the value. The value is simply what we pass or what we are trying to store into the variable we create. We create a variable called name and we are storing a value to the name called code with Crest. We create another variable called age and we are also storing a value to it called, or which is 4, and also another one of const. And constant variables are variables that does not change. All right, so as we said, let variables can constantly change within our program. Var can change, but not that most. But const variables or constants or constants, and these are variables that does not change. So if you have this type of variables in your program, be rest assured that this particular type of variables will never change in your program. So if you try to reassign a value to that particular variable, it will return an error. Now we are going to be using the console most often to actually use or to run JavaScript, since we are still in the teaching stage. And if you want to get to the console, you right click, go to the last page or to the last option and click on inspect, which means, what I mean is, you come over here, right click on your browser, click on inspect, and then now after you click on inspect, there's console, so click on console. I'm just going to increase this so that we can have a broad console, this, so that our console is kind of bigger. Click on console so you can see what we are doing. And we see here live reload is enabled because I'm using live saver, which was downloaded. Now the next thing I want to do is to use a function to use a function called console.log that permits us to be able to bring data to the console. Console.log is very, very good when it comes to actually solving bugs in our program and correcting errors, and we are going to be seeing how to utilize console.log. So the first one I will say is console.log, and I'll be console.logging the name that we created. So if I console.log the name here, you see that nothing prints. The first one is because the name attribute actually is being identified as a global variable, which means the name is deprecated. And what does it mean by the name is deprecated? It simply says that the declaration was marked as deprecated here, which means if we come here and we say we want to create a name 1, and here we are saying console.log name 1, you see now that that error actually goes out, and we can now see that code with Crest is being printed in our console. So the name keyword is just a global keyword. Global keywords are keywords that are set to be used by JavaScript. As we move further, we are going to see example of a global keyword is the let keyword, which means I cannot use let as a variable name. So if I come here and I try to create a variable and I say var let equals to, let's say hello. Now you discover that we cannot use let simply because let is a global keyword, because we are using already let in our program to actually create variables. So this is totally wrong. Now, there are other things you could do to variables. You could actually reassign values to variables. For instance, you could say name1 now, instead of being code with Crest now, is equals to code with Crest, or let's say Crest Lansing. And also we could say age now is equals to, let's say 11, and we could also say is developer is equals to false. Now, if I come over here and I want to do a console.log of those 3 values, you are definitely going to see an error. Even if I save now, you are definitely still going to see an error. Now, over here, let me close GitHub Copilot suggestions. If I come over here and I change this to age, and I change this to is developer, and I save, now you're going to see that we are having an error. So this uncaught error here is simply anonymous app.js line 9, which simply says assignment to a constant variable. So this is a constant variable we created. Is developer is a constant, and we are assigning a value to a constant, and we said that a constant in a program does not change, which means when you define a constant, you are not supposed to reassign a value to the constant, but once you have a let and a var variable, you can actually reassign values to them. So if I remove that and I save, you are now going to see that it will print Crest Lansing 11 and true. Why is it now printing Crest Lansing 11 and true? It's simply because at the top we define variables, but at the bottom we have reassigned the variables, which means we have given different values to those specific variables. Now, if I move this to the top of this section here, like this, for us to be able to see. If I save this now, you are now going to see that it will start by printing the values above, which simply means in programming, your code is read line by line, which means it starts reading from the top to the bottom, which means if we have new old values at the top and new values at the bottom, and we are printing in the middle, it will actually print the values in the middle. So those are the basics. Now, the next thing we want to talk about are the data types. Now, JavaScript is not a programming language that you specify the data type of a variable before you actually use it in your program, like others. For instance, if you're in C, you say string, name should be equals to, let's say, Crest Lansing, like this with a semicolon. Now, we are not actually in C, so string keyword is not of use. Why? This is like a fault. But if you are in JavaScript, you don't specify the variable type, so it automatically understands the type of that particular variable you're passing when your program is being executed. But there are many types of variables or data types. We have the string, which is simply text. We have number. We have Boolean. And we have undefined. We have the null, and like we have so many data types that we can use. So undefined and these are simply like values when you don't define things. Now let's see when something can be undefined. If we created code with the name here and we console.log the name here, and I kind of save this, you are going to see now that this value will be termed undefined. Why? We have created a variable, but we have not defined the variable. We don't know what we are storing in the name. Name as well could be equals to, let's say, a number 1. Now it becomes 1. That is when the number is defined. But when we create a variable and we don't assign anything to it, it becomes 1. Sorry, it becomes undefined. Now I can also create a variable and I say this variable should be null. Null simply means it does not store anything. So null, it does not store anything. So you should be able to grasp and understand all of these concepts. Now, the next thing we're going to talking about will be operations and expressions in JavaScript. Now, what are operations and how can we perform expressions in JavaScript? Now, let's kind of remove all what we have done so far. I will try to see how we can perform operations and expressions in JavaScript. Now, let's take for instance that we have two values x and y. So we can simply say let a, or let's say let x be equals to 20 and let y be equals to 30. Now we have two variables. The different operations that we can perform to this particular two values here are many, which means the operations that we can perform on this can either be, we can perform an addition, we can perform subtraction, multiplication, division, and even modulus. So there are many operations that we can actually perform with these variables, and it depends. You can use as multiple variables as possible. Let's take for instance, if we want to print the addition of x and y, we simply say let sum should be equals to x plus y, something like this. And if we come down here, we can actually print sum to see what sum prints. So if I say console.log and we say we should print the sum and I save, you're actually going to see that it will print the value 50. Why? Because 30 plus 20 is equals to 50. The same as we could also directly perform this execution in this console.log, which means we could simply say console.log and we simply say x plus y and we'll still print 50. Why? Because x plus y is 50, which means we can perform the expressions directly inside of that. So I'm just going to copy this line of code here, Control C, and I'll paste it here multiple times. And then here now we're going to change this to minus. We are going to change this to multiplication. Multiplication is using asterisk. You press Shift 8 to get the multiplication sign. And then now we have the division sign. And I'll be adding the last one, which will be the modulus. And the modulus simply prints the remainder of a value divided by another, which means you use percentage to actually create modulus. So if I save this now, you're going to see the different printing it will do. So the first one we have is the addition. Now with that, let me just comment this and then I refresh the saver. So we have, so the first one is x plus y that prints 50, which is simply 20 plus 30 prints 50. The next one is x minus y. X is 20 minus 30, negative 10. X times y, which is simply 30 times 20, 600. The next one is x divided by y, which is simply 20 divided by 30, which is 0.6666. And the last one is simply the division of 20 by 30 that leaves a remainder of 1. So that is simply it. So that is it. We have the modulus and stuff. So that's simply how you can actually perform a mathematical expressions. Now there are other mathematical expressions that are termed to be as conditional expressions. For instance, we could check if the value of x is equals to, greater than, or less than y. So how do we do that? We simply, I'm still going to use the same console.log, so I'll print the same statement. But instead of actually using this, there are different values or signs we can use for this. And greater than, we use this. Less than, we use this. Greater than or equals to, we have this. Less than or equals to, we have this. Equal to, equivalent to, not equals to is this. And not equivalent to, we also have this. Now, these are the different values that we have here. Now inside here we can actually check if x is greater than y. It can either print true or false. So if I save this, you should be able to see result down here, false, which simply says x is less than y. The same way we could just come down again and we paste and we try another, which simply means is x less than y. Let's see if it prints true. It says true. The next one here, as you can see over here, it prints true. The next one we have is, let's say if x is equal to y and we save, it will simply return false. Why? Because the value of x and y here is not the same. But what if the value of x is also 30? Now if we refresh this, it prints true, but we know that 30 is this. But there's something that we need to understand about these operations. Remember we said that there are different types of variables. We had string, integer, number. Now if we make this guy here a string, like we put it inside of quote and we save, this is still going to return true. Why is it returning true when 30 string is not the same as 30, which is a number? This is simply because double equals to sign checks the value. So if you want to check both the value and the data type, you need to add another equals to sign, which makes 3, which is the equivalent sign. So if we refresh now, we are going to see it returning false instead of true. So x, which is a string, which is 30, is not equals to y, which is a number that is also 30. So this is actually a very big difference. And in programming, you should be able to know all of this because you are going to be solving a lot of bugs if you don't know how to use these things properly. So pause this video and try this small exercise. I want you to create 3 variables, and for these 3 variables, perform addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division, and then take 2 of the numbers and perform the greater than, less than sign, equivalent, and other signs. And I also want, if you watch this video right to this moment, I want you to go to the comment section and type the differences between the double equal to sign and the triple equal to sign, as we saw in this last console.log. All right, welcome back after doing your exercises, and I hope you actually did go through that particular exercise. In our next step here, we are going to be seeing how we can create conditional statements using if else, and how conditional statements can actually do help in programming. So what I'll be doing here is simply I'm going to be clearing what we have done so far. So I'll just control everything and I'll delete. So what is a conditional statement? A conditional statement is simply used to check if the user is logged in or not, or if something is either true or false. So we can use a conditional statement to check if a specific thing is true. Let's take, for instance, we started by saying let x equals to 30, and we also said let y is equals to, let's say, 10. Now if we use a conditional statement, we can check if the value of x is equals to y, or if x is greater than y, or if x is less than y, or whatever x and y kind of is doing. So we use conditional statements to actually check if illogically something is true. So for instance, we can say if the value of x is greater than y, we want to be able to print that x is greater than y. So we simply want to console.log that x is greater than y, and in our else block, or let me just say this is what we have. Now it says x is greater than y. Why? Because the value of x is 10 and the value of y is, sorry, the value of x is 30 and the value of y is 10. And let's take for instance that the value of x was 1 and we run. Nothing happens. That is simply because in an if statement or in an if else block or a conditional, we have two set of conditions that must occur. We have an if condition and we have an else condition. The else condition occurs when the if condition is false, which means if the condition we pass over here is not fulfilled, we want to be able to perform a specific task, which means at the end here we can simply say else. We simply want to say, so say else. In our else statement, we simply want to say console.log, and our console.log, we simply want to create a string here and we say y is greater than x, and we save. So if I save now, you're going to see it says y is greater than x. But before, when we had just this particular statement here, let me comment it. Once we had just the one above, you saw it was printing that. Now it's because I've commented the whole line. Let me just remove it. So if I bring this down here and I comment this and I save, you see it will start by printing nothing. Why? Because the value of x is less than and we don't have any else block. But if I change this to 100, it actually prints something. But if I remove it and save, it does not print, but we need to uncomment the else block, and then now it would be able to print out something to the console. Now, if else statement comes in pairs, which means you can perform series of logical conditions that can occur. And let's say for instance that x and y is equal. Like if I save this now, you discover that the value of x and y is the same, but it says y is greater than x. But why is it printing y is greater than x? It simply means, or it's simply because the condition we have passed in here is not true, which means it results to the else condition. But what if we had another statement that should be able to check if x is greater than y, if x is less than y, if x is equals to y? So we should have multiple conditions, and for us to do that, we have to use what we call nested if conditions. So we call it nested if statements. And nested if statement simply gives us the possibility to nest multiple conditions within the same if else block. So with that said, let's take for instance that before this else statement here, we cut this out, and then here we add another else if. Let's say we wanted to say else if x is less than y. We want to be able to console.log and say that the value of x is less than y, and also still want to be able to still have another else if. So else if, let's say x is equal to y, we want to be able to simply say console.log. We want to be simply able to say console.log x is equals to y. And then at the end now, we have our else block, which is simply what we had before. Sorry, I did not print it. I did not copy it. So I'll just retype it again. So say else, or simply say console.log s and y are not comparable, which means the value of x and y, we can't compare it. So if I save this now, we are going to see our result simply says x is equal to y, because x is equals to 1 and y is equals to 1. Now let's check an instance where x is 12 and y is 1. It simply says x is greater than y. What about when the value of y is 101 and x is 12? We are going to see that x is less than y. But what if this guy now is a string and we save? It's going to tell us that x is still less than y. Why? Because it's taking this comparison here, telling us that x is less than y, because it's still checking it with respect to not considering the data type. But if there was something else, like let's say hello, and we save, it's actually going to say x and y is not comparable. So that's how you can use if else blocks or conditionals in your program. And yeah, So that is it about this particular section. So we are going to be moving over to the next section. Before we get to the next section, let me give you guys a quick example or a quick exercise. So I want you to write a simple program that will be able to take a name or two values which are name values and check if those name values are actually equal or equivalent or not equals to each other. All right, let's move over to the next as you do that. And if you are actually in this particular section of the tutorial, I want you to go to the comment section and type in if else statements, so I know that you got to this section of the tutorial. All right, so let's try another exercise using if else conditional statements, and we're going to be writing a program that checks if a number is either positive or negative. So this program here, we are going to create a let keyword, or sorry, we are going to create a let variable that says number, and in this number we are going to be storing a value, let's say 10. And we want to write a program that will be able to check if the number is either positive or negative. Now, the first one we need to understand is that with using numbers or checking if a number is positive or negative, we need to be able to know the logic that occurs behind. So how do we know that a number is positive and how do we know that a number is negative? A number is positive when it is greater than 0 and a number is negative when it is less than 0. So we create an if else statement where we say if number is greater than 0. So if a number is greater than 0, if a number is greater than 0, so if a number is greater than 0, we actually want to say the number is positive. So this particular number here is positive. So we can say console.log and we say number is positive. So if we save this, we have number equals to this. And we check here, it says number is positive. Why? Because the number is greater than 0. Now, if you want to actually complete this, we need to be able to give an else statement stating that else number is negative. So we simply say else if number is kind of less than 0, we want to just console.log and we say number is negative. So this is what we have. Then we can now have a default else statement, which will actually be like a default else statement. And this particular else statement here will simply be able to like console.log that maybe number is 0 or number does not exist or something, because 0 actually is either not a positive or negative number. We cannot have a negative 0 or positive 0. Now we save this. We are going to see here that it says number is positive. Now if I come here and I change this, let's say to 0, for instance, it's actually going to tell us that number is 0. But if we change this maybe to negative 23 and we save, it's going to tell us that what number is negative. So that's simply a simple program to check if a number is positive or negative. We could also write a similar program that checks if a number is either an even or an odd number. And we know that the difference between an even and odd number is simply that an even number is divisible by 2 while an odd number is not divisible by 2. So on this same program here, we are just going to edit it to actually 4. So for us to know if a number is even, if it divides 2 and leaves a remainder, then it's even. So I want to say that if number here modulus 2, and we use percentage for modulus, so we say if number modulus 2 is actually or actually exists, if number modulus 2 is, let's say, is equal to 0, if number modulus 2 is equals to 0, like if we take this number and we divide by 2 and it leaves a remainder of 0, it means it is even. So this is an even number. But if we take this same number modulus 2 and it is not equals to 0, so we come back here and we just edit it. So if this modulus 2 is not equals to 0, we remove 1 0. If this is not equals to 0, we simply say number is odd or odd number. And then else, we simply say invalid number. And we save. So we are going to see negative 23 is an odd number. If we change it to negative 28 and we save, it says it's an even number. If we change it to 0 and we save, it says even number. If we change it to 55, it says it is an odd number. So this is simply a simple program that checks if a number is even or odd. And we have also seen a program that checks if a number is positive or negative. And we also wrote a basic program that checks two variables together. Now your exercise will simply be for you to create a variable that checks if someone is either a child, a teenager, or an adult. So if your age is greater than, let's say if your age is less than 12, you're a child. If it is less than 19, you're a teenager. And if it is greater than 19, you are simply an adult. So you can pause the video and actually do or try to write this particular program. All right, let's continue with the video. All right, so in this next section, we are going to be seeing how we can use loops. And all right, so first, what is a loop? A loop is simply you being able to perform a specific action within intervals of time depending on what you want to do. And there are actually two types of loops that literally work well in JavaScript, which is the for loop and we have the while loop. So this is simply how you can implement these loops and how you can use them. Let's take for instance that you want to print from 1 to 10, and you cannot just print from 1 to 10 by simply saying console.log 1, console.log 2, console.log 3, console.log 4, console.log 5, console.log 6, console.log 7 until 10. So we cannot actually do that. But before we proceed, let me just comment what we have done above such that we can proceed. So if I come down here, we have console.log 1. Let me save. Like if we wanted to print from 1 to 10, we can't just print like 10 console.logs in a line. So we want to be able to create a program that should be able to kind of do it without us being able to print 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, right up to 10. So this is actually what we would have been doing to be able to print from 1 to 10. But with the help of loops, we can actually create a loop that loops from a specific number to another number and print the values for us. So as we said, there are two types of loops, which are simply, we have the for loop, the while loop. Actually, there's another third loop which is also under the while loop, which is a do while loop, which we are going to see also how it operates. Now let's start with the for loop. Now if you want to have a for loop, the first thing we need to have is to be able to understand how to actually create a for loop. So to create a for loop, we use the for instance, like the for keyword, and in the for keyword, we need to be able to create a variable that we are going to be looping inside. So we can say for let's say x to be equals to, let's say we want to have an initial value. Let's say we are starting from 0 because we want to count from 1 to 10. So say when x equals to 0, we'll put a semicolon. Then we will have to define the condition. So the condition is simply when x is simply less than or equals to 10. And after this condition, now we need to be able to specify if either we are incrementing or we are decrementing. I'll explain a bit incrementation and decrementing after we write this and run it first time. So I'll put x plus plus for an increment, of which I'll still explain later. So we simply want to console.log the value x, and that is it. So if I save this, you're actually going to see that this program will be able to print from 1 to 10. Now it says there's an error. It says uncalled typo error. Console is not a function. All right, I did not put the log, so say console.log, or sorry, .log, and we save now. It should be able to print from 1 up to 10. So this is our program printing from 1 to 10 in just 2 lines of code. And if we wanted to write a console.log, we would have written 10 lines of code to print console or to print from 1 to 10. Now let me explain the differences between an increment or a decrement. If you look at this for loop keenly, you are going to discover that we are beginning from a value 1 and we want to end at the value 10. But what if we wanted to count from 10 to 1, which means we start from 10 and we go down to 1. If we put 0 here and down here we put 1, now we can't be incrementing. Now we need to decrement, which is minus minus. Increment is plus plus, decrement is minus minus. Now if I save this, the program now will count from 10 right up to 0 to 1. All right, so we have x minus minus. So the next thing we need to do for it to be able to print is to come here and change this to greater than or equals to 10, since we are leaving from 10 and we are going up to down to 1. So now you can see our program start printing 10, 10,9,876,543,2,1. So that is simply how you can do a counting. So if we wanted to count from 1 to a billion, all we need to do, or let's say from 1 to a billion, I can just change this to 1, and then over here I will change it to plus plus, and then here I will just change this to less than, or that I'll change it to less than, or this, and then let's just say 100. So you see we have 100 printed in the console, which means if I increase another 0 here, we have from 1 to 1000. So you can see, so that's it, printing and going, guys. So that's simply how you can print. So you see we are printing from 1 to 1000 just with 2 lines of code. So that's simply how you can do it. Now the next one, or the next type of loop that we have, is a while loop. Let me comment this, and let me just remove these 2 zeros. Now we have a while loop. So the way a while loop works is simple. We want to loop over, or want to do something while something is true. So the first one is we need to create a variable. Let's say let j, for instance, is equals to 10. Now we want to be able to use our while loop, and while is created using the while keyword. So we say while the value of j is still less than, let's say 10, okay, let's say 20, while x is still less than 20, we want to be able to be printing the value j. So simply want to console.log. We want to console.log the value j. And then there's a catch here. If you remember in the for loop, we did an increment somewhere. So we want to also be increasing the value of j. So we want to be able to say j plus plus at every instance. So if we run this particular program here, you are going to see it prints 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, and it stops at 19. But if we add an equals to here, if x is less than or equals to, now it will print the last value, which is 20. So that's how you can use a for loop and a while loop in your program. And also, as exercise, you can write a for loop that prints the multiplication table of 5. All right, let's just do it. So if we want to write something that prints the multiplication table of, let's say, 5, now I'll comment the while loop, and in here I will uncomment this other one here. So we want to write the multiplication table from 1 to 5, and we actually want to write in the format 1 times this is equals to this times this is equals to this. We can actually do that. So the first thing is simple. We need a specific standard, or we need a variable that we want to be able to print for. So what we want to do here is simple. We have a for loop, and the multiplication table should be of 4, which means we leave from 1 to 12. Multiplication tables end at 12. And first, let's save this to be able to print all the values to 12. But the next thing we want to do is to be able to kind of print a value. And we are going to create a variable here. So we can call it let, and this let will simply be number. And this particular number can be anything. Let's say number now is equals to 5, because we want to create a multiplication table of 5. We can come inside here and we simply say console.log the multiplication table of 5. So we simply want to first of all use a string, and let me remove x first. So we can use a string here, and we say all right, we want to be able to say x, right? And we use a plus sign to concatenate, or join two things together to display. So use the value plus to concatenate. All right, so as we said, concatenation is simply combining two things together and displaying it. And we use plus sign to actually perform a concatenation. Let's say, for instance, we can say concatenating x and hello here. If we save this, right click, and we go to inspect, and we go over to the console, we'll be able to see the concatenation of x and hello. So it's concatenating and displaying x hello. So if you look keenly in the console, you see it says 1 hello, 2 hello, 3 hello. So once we be able to say this times this is equals to this. So if we come here, we can just put a space, and then we'll put the value x here for the multiplication sign. Though add another plus, so we are doing multiple concatenation. So we want to say x plus the number. So we have the number variable here, and we want to concatenate it plus, then we add an equals to sign here, something like this. So we want to say is equals to, let's add another plus sign again to concatenate x times number. So I want to say it should be x times number. And if we save this, we should now be able to see the multiplication table of x and 5 on the number, which we have 1 times 5 equals to 5, 2 times 5 until we get to 12 times 5 equals to 60. If you want to change it to the multiplication table of 2, we just change the number to 2, and as we save it, it reloads here and we have the multiplication table of 2. So that's how you can use a for loop to actually create a multiplication table of a specific number. Alright, you can pause this video and take as exercise. Try to create your for loop and try to do something. Just wrap your head around with the for loop to see how it actually do work. All right, the next step we're going to be talking about will be arrays, and arrays also will be linked to this because we'll see how we can use this to actually loop through the array. Or I'll comment this and I'll go down and then we'll talk about arrays. Now we spoke about the different data types, and an array is simply like a data structure, which means we are using an array to actually store data of the same data type. And for us to create an array, we can say let's say array called cars. Let's say I want to create an array of cars. We can create an array called cars that takes series of values, like let's give types of cars. We have BMW, we have Benz, we can have a Benz, we can also have another one, Toyota. Let's say we have Toyota. And we have so many cars, so we can also have Mercedes. So we have many cars. So this is simply like the cars that we have. Now the next thing we want to do is to be able to display. Now for us to be able to display a specific value of an array, we must specify the index of that particular array. Now the array structure is defined in such a way that a value can be identified by what we call an index, and an index points to the specific location of a specific value. So let's take, for instance, I want to print the first array. We should be able to say console.log. All right, we should be able to say console.log, and in here we simply want to print car at index number 0. So if we say we console.log car at index number 0, it will print BMW, simply because indexes begin from the 0 index upward, which means in this particular array here, this is index 0, this is index 1, this is index 2, this is index 3. So this particular array has several index. I'll be leaving a link in the description of this video of what you can learn in depth about array, because there are multiple things you can actually do with an array. For instance, you can console.log the number of values that are found in this array, which means you simply say console.log. You can say array.length. So I want to print the car.length of this particular array. So if we print array.length, it will return the number of values that are found in that particular array. You say the length is not a function, so we remove so I just removed the two brackets. I was kind of calling in form of a function. So if you say car.length, it will print the number of values in that array, and we have 1, 2, 3, 4. So this is 1, 2, 3, 4 values that are actually found in that array. So the length of the array is actually 4. So that is how you can do it. Now you can have arrays that stores different data, which means not like this different data types, but different data. For instance, you can create a variable, another let called marks, that actually stores series of marks. For instance, we can have 12, 14, this, comma, this, comma, this, comma. So we can have an array like this that stores this. All right, I missed the equal to sign. So we can have an array that stores this, and the same way as we print the one up, we can also print the array by actually mapping the index. Now let's take an example where we have an array that has like close to 100 values. Let's say we had an array like this, like so many values. So that does not mean we'll keep on printing each index this way. We can actually use a for loop to be able to print all the values. So for instance, like the notion of the for loop that we have seen at the top, we can actually utilize it down here. So we can say for instance, we create a variable let x to be our looping variable, maybe to be equals to 0. And we want to actually start from when x is equals to 0 to when x is less than or equals to the max dot length. So we want to arrive the max.length, and after that now we simply want to just increment the value of x. So we simply say x plus plus to actually increment the value, and in here we simply want to say console.log the value, which is simply the max. So we simply want to say console.log. And what are we console.logging at this instance? We want to console.log the value of max at the index I. So now let me explain at index x, at index x. Now what are we trying to do here? We want to be able to print the index or all the values here. And we are saying that for when we are creating a variable x equals to 0 to when x is less than the length. Remember here, this returns the length of the array. So it done when it's equals less than the length. So we have the less than the length. So when it's less than max is less than the max.length, and we are incrementing the value, we actually want to print out all the values. So we are printing max at the x index, which means when the value of the index is 0, it prints the array at 0. When the value is 1, it prints the value at 1 until when we get to the max length. So if I save this now, you are going to see that it will print all the values in our array. So it prints, like it starts by printing BMW, which is simply from this other array at the top here, which I'll comment, and we save this. Then now you'll be able to see that it prints all the values in the array. So that is it. So that's simply how you can actually use a for loop to be able to loop through an array. So we use arrays to actually store values. If you're creating a program that you want to be able to check marks and do stuffs, you can actually store them in an array. Let's take for instance that in this simple program, we want to be able to take the values we have here, sum the values together, and then we want to actually display the sum at the end. So what we can actually do is that we have the array of marks. The next thing is we want to create a sum. So we can say let sum initialize to 0. So we say let sum equals to 0. And then inside here, all we want to do is to be able to get this. So let me just copy this, Control C. We want to be able to say sum. We want to be able to say sum plus equals to this. So this is what we want to do. So we want to say sum plus should be equals to this. So we are saying that the sum is equals to the initial sum plus the max at x index. And at the end of the day, we want to be able to bring this console.log down here. All right, we want to be able to bring this console.log outside of the for loop here, and we want to print the sum. So the total sum. So here we want to print the total sum, and if I save this now, you should be able to see that we are having the total sum being displayed. You could still take this sum and manipulate the sum to actually do what you want. Let's take for instance, you want to create the average, and for you to create the average or to display the average, you can simply create another variable called let average or AVR to be equals to the sum divided by what? The array.length, which is simply max dot the length of it. And if I save this now, we'll be able to display the average, but we haven't printed the average. So I can also say console.log, Control X, so console.log. And in here, we want to print AVR. And if I save this, we should be able to see the average, which is 31.2. So if you take 624 and you divide by the number of values in this array here, it will be able to now give you this particular value here. So that is simply how you can use arrays to actually manipulate and do things with the help of JavaScript. Now, if you understood this concept so much, I want you to be type in the comment section that you are actually at the level of understanding what the for loop is all about. All right, so you can pause this video here at this point and try to work out on an exercise using a for loop and looping through a specific array. So in this array, you want to be able to loop through the array and just display an array of values and only display the positive numbers and neglect the negative numbers. So that's an exercise. Pause the video and try doing it, then come back to it to continue. All right, let's move over to the next section of this video, which will be understanding what functions are and how you can use functions in your program. All right, so now we have gotten to the cool part. Now, we have seen how to do things in a procedural way, but we want to be able to understand how we can actually control when we want an operation of something to actually occur. And this is where functions come in. So a function is simply a block of code that gets called to execute a specific condition or specific set of instructions when necessary. So functions can only run when called, and if you don't call a function, the function will never run. There are some inbuilt JavaScript functions that we have been using, like console.log, alert, that are there, but there are functions that you can actually create. And there are two types of functions that we are actually going to be seeing how you can create these two types of functions in this program. So there are two types of functions. The first one we have are normal functions, and then we also have another one called the arrow function. Now, a normal function starts with the function keyword, which means when you're trying to define the function, you start with the function keyword followed by the function name, let's call hello. And this particular function with the bracket that takes parameters, and then now this one here that actually have the block of code that is going to be executed in the program. Let's say, for instance, that here we simply want to console.log here. We want to console.log hello world. Now, if I save this, remember anything we used to do and we say console.log and we save it actually runs. This function does not run simply because we have not called the function yet in our program. So if I come here and I say hello, for instance, and I pass this and I save, you are now actually going to see that this will now be called in here, and we will actually see hello world being printed. So functions can only run when called. So you can create programs that actually run on a specific command to which you call them. Let's take, for instance, you want them to occur on a click of a button. We are going to see how to do that also later on in this video, but for now we are just understanding what functions are. Now, this function can take a parameter. Let's take, for instance, that this function is taking a parameter hello. And this particular function here takes parameter hello. We can simply say console.log hello. And in here now, we need to be able to pass in a value that will be stored in hello. We can say, hey, how are you? And I save. Now, this says, hey, how are you? Which means this particular function can take a variable, like a placeholder of what we actually want to be there when we call the function, and while calling the function we can now actually pass the actual value. Now the difference between this is that this is a parameter while this is an argument. So the difference between a parameter and an argument is simply that a parameter is what you put in a function that acts as a placeholder, while the argument is simply the real values. For instance, this is real text that you can read and understand. This one here is just like a variable name, for instance, greet. I can call this greet, and in here I change this to greet. So if somebody just says greet, you don't know, but maybe here we can just say good evening, and you know that, okay, this person is actually greeting you and saying good evening. So that's simply how you can create normal functions. The next type of functions that we're going to see how to create are the arrow functions, and the arrow functions always begin with the keyword. For instance, let, var, and const. So you can create different types of variable functions depending on this. And the first thing about arrow function is that it starts with the keyword, like the function definition keyword, as if it's a variable. So I can call this let hello, or let's call this one hey. Let hey be equals to, then you have a bracket, and then now you have arrow greater than, then parameters. So this is how you create an arrow function. And an arrow function is always good at times when you have elements that will be returned within the function. For instance, in this function here, we can take a parameter here called hey, and in here we actually just return hey, like this. So in here, if I want to be able to call this function here, I can simply say console.log, and in here I want to call hey, I want to call hey, and in hey here we need to pass in the parameter, and we are simply returning something like hey, I, like Helly, I greet to something like this. So if I save this now, you should be able to see that it console.log hey, I agree to. So this is simply how you actually create the two types of functions. And in as much as this without a parameter. This function can also work without any parameter, but it's mostly good for when you have to return something in your program. For instance, we could simply say console.log, and in this console.log here, we can simply say hello world. And then now here, this function now will not be expected again to have any parameter. And also we can't use this the way it is first, because it would throw an undefined error. Why? Because we are calling a function again in console.log that does not return anything. Then now if I refresh now, you see it says hello world. So here is actually the implementation of this particular function. So if we remove the calling of this function and the calling of this other function, and despite having code in our program, it actually does not return anything or print anything to the console or does anything. So that is actually it about creating functions. Now your exercise will simply be to create a function. But before that, let's try to do something real quick. Now remember at the top here, we have already done something that actually does something. For instance, to be able to take max and do something. So we could actually convert this to be in a function, which means I can just kind of come here and I cut all of this, and I come here in this function here that says hello, and I just paste everything inside here like this, and I will just adjust them to be aligned the same. So we have this. Now let me remove this array outside. So this is the array outside here, and we will change this function into calculate max. That takes in an array, we'll call it ARR, and simply what we want to do there is that we'll have the sum this, and we'll have the array.length. And once we take the array.length, we'll now print, we'll have a sum somewhere which is equals to this. Then now we have this that actually occurs inside. Then now, instead of having max here, we still have the array, and also here we also have the array, something like this. So if we come now down here and we try to call the function calculate this parameter, and then now we pass in max as our actual value, calculate max, and we save. Now we are going to see that this particular function now will be able to perform the execution that is occurring inside here, which means at the beginning, we know we said let sum equals to 0 for when x equals to 0 to when x is less than the array.length, x plus plus sum equals to array, sum initial sum plus array at an index x, and then we console.log the sum. We let the average to be equal to sum divided by array.length, and then we console.log the average. So you can see it's displaying this and this, which is the sum and the average. So that's how you can actually group specific functionality to be as a specific function. Also, if you've arrived this point of the video and you want to join my coding community, check in the description of the video. You can join my coding community and you can ask me any question you want to ask and get responses in less than no time. All right, so that is it about functions, and we are going to be riding over to the last section of this particular course. All right, so I believe you should be asking yourself now that, okay, we are just writing things and printing on the console, then how do we actually use JavaScript to actually write something that displays something on the front end? Now, let's take a look at what we have here. So we have our page here, hello world. Let me close this and we see this very well. Now, this is now where we are going to understand why we have like event listeners. And for us to be able to use event listeners, we must have like things to be able to, or to easily identify what we are working on. So I'll give this HTML h1 tag h1, and I'll also create a div with a class name container, and this is the div here. So the div can contain content or something. Now, how can we actually do or manipulate things within this? So inside here, I can also create a button that has an ID, btn, and then here I can simply say click me and I save. So this is just what we have created. This one will not show because this is actually a container. If you don't understand what this is, check my video above that talks about introduction to HTML and a bit of CSS, and some videos in my channel that I've walked you guys through creating landing pages and stuff. All right. So here we have a button. Now we want to be able to use JavaScript to actually create events, to listen to events and perform specific tasks. Now let's take for instance that we want to be able to run this JavaScript function that we have created here whenever you click a button. So what I'll simply do here is simple. I will copy this over here. You go to your HTML and then you can add an on-click event in your button. So over here, you can specify an event which is simply the on-click event. You want it that when somebody clicks this particular event here, you should be able to run this particular function here. And you want to be able to also pass this particular guy here, of which I think might return an error or might not work because they are not in the same file. And if I save this and I click on this, let's now right click and go to the console. Right click, go to the console and see what displays there. All right, let me move this up. Let's see if clicking that button did something. All right, so it did do it. Let me come back here and I'll remove where we are actually calling this. So this will be deleted and I save such that nothing actually displays, it refreshes. Now if I click this button here, you see it actually prints the values. So if I click, it prints the values, click, it prints the values. Now let's change console.log to alert and alert. So if I come here now, I can say alert, and I also come here, I can also say alert, so we can see everything doing on the front end. So we can say alert, okay, and I save. Now if I close this now and I click on this button here, it alerts the first value, okay, it alerts the second value. So this is how you can actually use the HTML to be able to create events or to listen to events that are occurring in your HTML, and then you perform JavaScript tasks. Now let's take for instance, you could still want to be able to print the value inside of your HTML. So that's what we call the DOM, and the DOM is simply how JavaScript communicates with the HTML. So it's called a document object model, or DOM simply means document object model, which is simply how JavaScript communicates with the HTML. And a DOM method is actually defined in terms of like a tree. So JavaScript reads everything in your HTML in form of like a tree. It can access every node in that particular tree. Now, for us to be able to actually utilize it, if you go back to our HTML here, you see that I've specified some extra attributes, which are the ID parameters, and we can use the ID parameters to be able to get values and do stuff. Now, let's take for instance, for this value ID here, H1, we can come over here and we try to get that particular value. Now let me go right down here and I try to do something. So here, if you want to be able to get the value, we can first of all create a value which will be like a let var h1, let's call it h1 is equals to, let's say, document dot get element by ID. Now you can get the element by anything. For instance, let's say get element by, you can see this by class name, by tag names, or anyone. So we are going to go with by ID, and in here we want to pass in the ID, which is h1. Now we can say h1 dot like h1. Now in here we can simply say h1 dot inner HTML should be equals to hello world. This is updated and save. So what happens, it changes to hello world, this is updated, which means you can use JavaScript to actually change something. Now let's make this happen. Now we want to click the button and then we tell the user that, okay, hey, you just click the button. So we can just simply do that simply by just embedding this inside of a function and changing the content here to, hey, you just click the button. Let's take for instance that we want a button that a function. So let's just call this, let's create a normal function called click, and this particular function called click me, will simply change the value. So what we'll simply do here is simply to cut all of this and then we'll put it inside of the function here. Let me just adjust this, and then here we simply want to change this to, hey, you just clicked me. Let's say, hey, you just clicked me. Whew. And now we have our text back as hello world. If I click this now, it alerts. Now we haven't called the function yet, so we need to be able to call this click me function in our program. So we come back here, then we come to where we have this other button here that was displaying the marks. We could just change this function parameter here and save, and now Whenever we click this button, it will change the content. You can use JavaScript to perform many tasks, like many things. For instance, I could give an ID to this body here, ID, and I call this body, and I get the value of the body, and I change the styles and do many things. I don't want this video to actually be long. We are going to be stopping at the point of this DOM manipulation. I'll be creating another in-depth video of how to do DOM manipulation with JavaScript, and we are going to do some basic projects for you guys to actually understand how to use the DOM manipulation project. Also, another video will be coming up, which will be the introductory JavaScript video to learning React. So in that video, we'll be breaking down some things that you need to know. Mostly we'll be working with arrays, and also learn how to use async awaits and promises in JavaScript, such that you can live with these 2, 3, or 4 tutorials that you get from this channel about React.js, about JavaScript, to actually get going with React.js. All right, so with no further ado, thank you guys for watching this far, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel, turn on the notification bell to get notified whenever we drop a video, and see you guys in the next video. All right, if you want to watch a video of how to create this particular thing in HTML, make sure to watch this next video to get started.